Okay, I'm going to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I'm so sorry that I am tech challenged, but I am no less delighted to be here talking with you all. Hopefully providing you some useful information about the admissions process and what admissions doesn't tell you. So I'm going to zip through these slides, and I guess, Kyla, I'm not quite sure how we're managing questions, but I will keep going and make sure that we have some time for questions at the end. So what I hope that we'll accomplish today is just providing you all with an understanding of the elements of the med school application, and some strategies to strengthen your application to be a competitive applicant. And what I would say is, I'm not quite sure. There certainly could be some of you that are not that are interested in health professions and perhaps not specifically medical school. I think that much of the information and strategies are applicable to pursuing admissions and other health professions as well. So yeah, okay, thank you. Slide. Next slide. Oh, do you need a hand or something? Next slide. Okay, so what kind of student are you? So just being thoughtful about, how you are moving ahead with your goal to get to medical school. Do you attend classes? Do you sit in the front? Do you actively participate? Are you completing assignments on time? Are you a leader in the classroom? And does your instructor know who you are? And I think, when students are transitioning to college as freshmen, you're not, students aren't often thinking about these kinds of things. But the truth is, it's helpful to be, thoughtful about being the best student that you can from the gate, because you just never know, like, you're positioning yourself now for the future. So being actively engaged, making sure your instructors know who you are, because you'll need letters of recommendation and those kinds of things. Are you sitting in the front of the class? Why is that helpful? Because you're going to be likely more engaged as a student when you are sitting in the front. You're less likely to be distracted by the things that are happening, because most of the things will be behind you. And of course, these are COVID times, and so it's likely that if you are in school now, that you're probably taking some things online. And so what I would say to that is, be as active and as engaged in your learning process now as you can, and get to know your instructors, get to know your material, get to practice good study skills and being present sooner rather than later. Okay, next slide. Okay, so do grades matter? They absolutely do, and they matter from the gate. I would preface by saying, if a student has had, like, maybe not the greatest start, or maybe has had a difficult academic journey at some point, it's never over, right? And so I think that one of the strongest messages that I could leave you all with is that don't ever give up on yourself, because repair can happen, but you have to be smart and you have to be strategic. But in as much as you're able to be mindful that grades do matter, pay attention to that. Do you have to major in the sciences? No. Can you just take the prereqs? Yes. Your overall GPA is important. Your science GPA for sure, but don't slack on the overall as well. C's and withdrawals, W's aren't your friend. So I didn't preface by saying I work at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine. I sit on the admissions committee. C's aren't a deal breaker, but many C's causes admissions committee members to be concerned about a student's ability to be viable and to be successful. It doesn't mean that you can't, and it doesn't mean that you should choose another path. But again, trying to be mindful that these things matter. Oftentimes students, the first couple of years, maybe not as driven or maybe not as focused or not as clear. But if you can sort of do those things from the beginning, that's most helpful, but also know that it's never too late to turn things around. So even if you got not the greatest start, you can turn things around at any time. And so please keep that in mind. Don't do too much. So this is the thing. Like, so students often want to do many things. You want to do activities and social things, and certainly volunteering and shadowing, the kinds of things that sort of make for a strong med school application. Those are important, but we want to make sure that students are well-rounded. But sometimes you have to be mindful that you could be overextending yourself. And when you overextend, then sometimes your grades suffer. So being mindful of those kinds of things. Grade progression. Grade progression is really important. So you might have gotten, like, again, a rocky start, or something may have happened in the middle, sophomore year or junior year. Maybe maybe COVID has impacted your life in a very personal way. Maybe you've managed loss or whatever the case may be. We look at trends as well. And so maybe the beginning was not so great, but once the student found their stride, they trended up, meaning they got a solid sort of got their footing and was able to do better in a consistent way. All right, next slide. Next slide. Okay. Be a leader. So leadership is important, and people demonstrate leadership in different ways, right? And so, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on the e-board. It doesn't mean that you had to start an organization. Those things are very notable and helpful. And if that's what your passion is, then by all means do that. But we're not looking for students who are just check boxing things. And so don't do things because you heard that these are the things that you should do to make for a great applicant. Instead, do the things that you're excited about, do the things that you're passionate about. And when you are writing personal statements or you're in an interview, you are able to talk in an excited, passionate, engaged way about the kinds of things that you were doing. Being an officer, sure, and I don't mean to send a mixed message. If you are a leader, be a leader. If you're on the e-board, that's great. But there's all kinds of ways that people demonstrate leadership. And so if you're able to talk about the way that you impacted an organization that you were a part of, because sometimes people can lead from behind. And so don't feel like you're less viable or less competitive because you didn't have one of those top positions. But if that is your calling and you can manage that without great sacrifice of your grades, then by all means do that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so exposure to healthcare. So admissions committees we want to know that you know what you're getting yourself into. We want to know that you really want to pursue this and not something else. And we want you to know that because it's not helpful for you to pursue something that you then find out wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So what kinds of things have you done that really inform your desire or fuel your desire to want to be involved in this particular career path? And so shadowing, and so I'm sure that you know these things, right? So shadowing is important, volunteerism is important, and interactions with professionals and watching what they're doing, watching what kinds of behaviors are they doing, what are they engaging in, what are some of the challenges. And so being able to know what that is, talk about it, and just understand it so that also guides your interests. Being involved in other meaningful activities. What are you doing? Like, how are you impacting your community? Why, if you're applying to certain schools, why are you applying to these schools and not these schools? What kind of community service have you engaged in? And again, not 50 hours at 50 different places, but where's your commitment? What are you connected to? What are you passionate about? Those kinds of things. Have you been involved in research? Some schools require research. All schools don't. It's okay to not like it. It's also okay to be passionate about it, but you can talk about what you learned from the experience. Some students say, I learned that I really am not so interested. Some students may say, I learned that research drives clinical medicine, and that's really important. And so having a well-rounded applicant is wonderful. Sometimes students have had to work, students have been in the military. Being able to talk about all of those experiences and how it's contributed to your personal growth and development and the strength of your application. So meaningful experiences. What do you do for fun? What do you do for self-care? What do you do to make sure that you're in a good space? And so paying attention to that. Protecting your brand. That is really important. Can't stress that enough. School, now in the age of social media, students are very present on social media, and that could be a problem for folks. And so you want to pay attention to those things. You want to do a scan periodically just to see what you have posted, because the truth is, if it's posted, it's fair game. Right. And schools are not going to tell you that they're looking. Some schools look, some schools don't. And not as a matter of practice, but it could be a person on a committee that's like, I was a little bit curious. So I looked this person up. And so, a professional photo. So just make sure that if you are applying for something and they're asking for a picture, that it's not like a selfie that looks like you didn't take great care in how you were presenting yourself. And so a professional photo, it's not a bad idea to have a photo taken by someone who does them if you're able to do that. Also recognizing that, many applicants have limited resources, so that's not required. If you're able to do it, that's not a bad idea. But if you're not able to do it, just make sure that you're taking a professional looking photo, having someone take it of you rather than taking a selfie and those kinds of things. Be mindful of things that are in your Instagram or on your Facebook pages. If you wouldn't want grandma to see it or auntie to see it, if you have a separate page or whatever, just be mindful of your presentation out there, because it could create some difficulty for you if it presents you in not a great light. Okay, thank you. Next slide. It's more about protecting the brand. Okay. It's all, like I said, it's all fair game, strong political views. Those are, and again, it's not to silence you, just to be mindful of the way you're presenting yourself, and to be mindful of the people that may be reviewing your application. And so you just want to pay attention to those things. If you can privatize your settings, that's really helpful. Having someone monitor your social media, maybe you have someone look at it that you trust, that's, a family member or something, so that they can say like, hey, I saw this, and you might want to take that down, or you might want to, just pay attention to those things. Okay, so here's where we get into the things that students ask me about most. Oftentimes when I'm consulting with students, and I advise a lot of students, they're asking about MCATs. We know that credentials matter. And so the scores are important. Perhaps they are weighted more heavily than is necessary, but that's what we got. So want to say a couple of words about that. The first thing that I would say, and I don't know if this is on the slide, so I'm going a little bit off script, but do not take the MCAT if you are not ready to take the MCAT, right? If you've not prepared, then don't take it. If you have prepared and you're not getting the scores that you would want to get, don't take it. You're not going, if you've been getting 500s and you really want to be squarely planted at 506 or 504, I don't know, you're not going to make those leaps if you haven't been getting those scores on your practice test. So don't hope for a miracle, because that's not likely. That's an unrealistic, not well thought out plan. Now, I would certainly never say that it can't happen, but it's really unlikely that you're going to have a several point leap in your scores if you hadn't been getting that consistently. And you want to make sure that you're ready, because all of the scores are considered. So once you take it once, okay, you took it, you didn't pay that much attention or whatever the case may be. We look at those scores. And so self-preparation. Everyone doesn't have access to resources to take a Kaplan or a Princeton review. Um, it's helpful because there's structure there, and if you're able to do it, that's great. I talk with students all the time who's like, I don't have like $1,500, $2,500. What I would say is if you can find a summer program where they offer Princeton review or some sort of course as a part of the summer exposure program, that's not a bad thing to consider. But the message here is if you're not ready to take it, don't take it. Look around for online resources, because there are some. Take the practice test. If you can't get a course, again, don't want to be unrealistic because people have limited resources. Then find what's free and available, and ask other folks in your circles what they have done to prepare. All right, next slide. Okay. Personal statements. I want to be study groups. I want to go back. I'm sorry, and you don't have to go back to the other slide, but I didn't mention like study groups. Um, Surround yourself with people who are doing the kinds of things that you want to do and are, seem to have it together, right? And so you should diversify your learning circle and even your social circle because you get lots of neat tips from other people. You don't want to be the smartest person in your group, because then you don't grow. And so if there's a study group in your class and maybe the folks don't look like you, that is not a requirement. It is really helpful to have supportive others who look like you or with whom you share some demographic for sure. But it's also really helpful to know what other people are doing and what their like keys to success are, because you can learn a lot from sort of connecting with others. So don't be myopic in how you navigate through your school process, or even if you've graduated already and you're just still doing things to get yourself positioned to get into medical school or another health profession or whatever the case may be. Diversify your circle. Look for folks who've done what you're doing, and they could be, again, folks who look like you because they know what the road has been like and they're where you want to be. So that's really, really helpful and really important. But consider diversifying as well. Personal statement. We could do a whole session on personal statements. I guess the tips that I would offer you with is the personal statement, why medicine, that kind of thing. You want to spend time. So probably the tips that I could help you with here the most is like, it's like a work of art, if you will, and you'd want to spend, ample time preparing for your personal statement. It's not something that you can sort of rush and put together. It's an evolution. It will take multiple drafts. You want to make sure you take time and great care. You want to have multiple readers, but not too many, because too many opinions is probably in the end maybe not so helpful. To have readers who love you and think you're the best thing ever, not so helpful. It's good for confidence, but they can't be your only readers. Like, so if someone says, oh yes, baby, that's the greatest thing, that's a good confidence boost, but you need somebody to read for content. You need someone to read for grammar, someone to read for flow, maybe. If you are connected to a writing center, have them read it, because you just want multiple eyes on it. And be true to yourself. Be true to yourself, but remember that you are applying to a profession that is largely white, and I will just say that. And so everyone is not appreciating the same things in the same way. And that's no shade. That's just sort of be mindful of the people who may read your information. Admissions committees are, they are a reflection of the people who work in medicine. And while we are really trying to diversify medicine, so thank you, Dr. Hamblin, for your vision with this whole conference, and patients are waiting, but we're not there yet, and we need you all to get there. So, no justice, no peace. You want to make sure that if you're talking about how hard it has been and how the man has kept you down and the struggle is real, that you do that with some balance and just recognize that, and not to silence that because that's a part of your story, but to just be mindful of how you present it, because everyone is not going to take it in the same way. And so just have some folks take a look at it to give you some advising and some guidance about what that is and how to sort of navigate that. All right, next slide. Oh, okay, so not too fancy. Not too fancy. Sometimes, yes, it's a work of art, and I mean that sort of metaphorically, but don't do too much, as you always say. Well, she was doing a lot, she was doing the most. Don't do the most, write a clear, crisp, personal statement, and you don't have to make it, the angles and all these things that sort of, because too much, too fancy can be distracting. So you don't want to be distracting. Typos and grammar errors, of course, of course, of course. That's why you have someone read for grammar and typos, someone read for content, someone read for flow, or just to have different people pay attention to those different things. Read and reread. That feels really important. Yeah, okay. Next slide. Letters of recommendation. Could say a lot about that. And I guess the take home here is you are creating connections and relationships from the time you step foot on campus, from the time you start your first day of your volunteer experience, from the time you do the shadowing, the summer programs. You're creating and establishing relationships. And so you want to be mindful of those things, because these are the folks that you're going to swing back and ask for letters of recommendation, because you will need those, and you'll need several. And a short letter of recommendation, is a little bit of a red flag. If a person wasn't able to write about you, not that it has to be lengthy, so it's not quantity necessarily, but if it's short, you want some people that know you really well, I guess is the point. So there's that. And then I want to say a word about committee letters, because that comes up for students all the time, especially students that I advise. And I didn't mention, but I work in the diversity office at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine. And we also have a close connection with our pre-professional health studies office. And students oftentimes don't find out about committee letters until it's almost too late to even get one. And is there a little bit of a bias toward having them? I would say yes. Is it absolutely necessary? I would say no. Of course, every school is different. Every school that you apply to is different. I can't say what is the case for all. I can certainly speak about Lewis Katz. I think I can say that there is toward that you don't have one that you're interested in having. And, everyone's not able to get it because they find out about the last minute. The other thing is, you want to please, please, please make sure that you ask for a strong letter of recommendation, because I have read some letters that are really quite damning, actually. So not only are they not glowing, they, are problematic. And so you need to know that. And so ask for a strong letter of recommendation, and hopefully the person that's writing it would let you know of their comfort with doing that. Okay, so that feels really important. It's never too early to ask. You can, like after you take, the first bio class, if you did well in it, you were sitting in the front, you were engaged, the person knows who you are. It's better to ask for it at the end of the class than to wait for 2 years later and say, oh yeah, I did get a good grade in bio one. And, because they have since seen like 1,000 students since you had that class. And so get the recommendation after the experience, right after, and that's fine. It's never too early to ask. All right, next slide. And I think I mentioned this, professors, if you did a summer research program, if you worked in someone's lab, if you did some volunteerism, look, if you had somebody who, where you worked, that can be a helpful thing. But for admissions, you want to make sure that you have some letters from your science professors. That's usually required. And then, all of the other things that you may have done that have contributed to your application, the summer programs and those kinds of things, community service, youth groups, if you did AmeriCorps or some such thing, if you worked as a scribe. So if you had some employment, worked in a lab, science, but the educational piece and the professors, that's really important. And so like that's why you want to do well because you want to learn, you want to do well because you want good grades, you want to do well because when you do well, instructors may be a little more likely to remember who you are, or certainly if they don't really remember, if they go back and they say, oh well, you did well in the class, I'm happy to try to support you. So those things matter. Next slide. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. I think I hit all these things. Okay, uh-oh, that's a really bad looking slide. um Give thanks. When you are on this journey, when people have helped you, make sure you just give thanks. Let them know what you're doing. Send an email. I have students that like, oh, I'm doing this. Um, I did this over the summer. This is where I am in the journey. Just want to keep you informed because those things matter because I remember those folks. Other people remember those folks, and it helps you to sort of I guess stay focused and stay grounded and stay encouraged. Thank you notes are appreciated. Just folks in your village like to know how things are going and how they can be helpful, and they also uh, professors and people supervisors who were involved in your shadowing experience. I guess the point that I'm trying to make in a really awful way right now, and I apologize for that, is that we get asked to write letters all of the time. Physicians get asked all the time, the lab supervisors all of the time. And so, it's nice to let people know that you appreciate them and they, are more likely to even help you the next time. All right, so some final thoughts. And I don't know if there's chat bars and time for questions, and I see that I'm all but running out of time. Let's see. Make a plan early, adjust as needed. And so you're on this journey. You want to be thoughtful, you want to be intentional, but you adjust as you need to. Seek advice and support. Make connections. Reach out to offices. Oh, okay. Here we go. Some questions. Prioritize the demands on your time and attention. Yes, you can't do everything. Learn how to say no. That's a helpful thing. The no is a gift that you give to yourself. You heard it here first. Set some boundaries. That's important. Balance. You can't just grind because if it's not good for your well-being and your mental and emotional health, first of all. The trained psychologist in me is telling you balance is everything. But also, if you have an application that looks like all you were doing was just grinding for medical school, PA school, professional school, dental school, nursing school, whatever the case may be, then you might present as a applicant who looks like they're managing a life out of balance. Okay, so be mindful of that. I highlighted this making good decisions, institutional actions. I cannot tell you how often that comes up, and perhaps it shouldn't. I think there's a good amount, I believe, or I shouldn't say I believe, let me retract and say I wonder if there's a good amount of bias that's involved in students who are underrepresented and sort of bias in institutional actions. And so whatever the case may be, we could talk about that forever. But what I would say to you is just make sure if you had a little red cup back when you were a freshman, if you had some little silly altercation conflict with your roommate and it found its way to, conduct hearing, those things, you want to just pay attention to those things and have a response for those things and make sure that if you think you might have had something that you check, and you want to do your due diligence not to have multiple, because that can really be problematic. I've seen it sort of cause problems for people. Yeah, stay connected to offices that have shown themselves to be helpful and supportive of you. Because when you build your network, people want to help you. So I want to say that, if you're in a MAPS group, stay connected. If you're in a health professions group, whatever the case may be, summer program, stay connected and network and get the support that you need. All right, I'm going to pay